Good to go.
Good morning from Norman, Oklahoma. Greetings to our live Zoom audience and to those of you watching on YouTube afterward. A special welcome to our friends in India, where it's early evening. My name is Daniel Simon, and I'll be one of the co-hosts for today's Delhi and the Anthropocene conversation event. It's my privilege to serve as the editor-in-chief and assistant director of World Literature Today, University of Oklahoma's award-winning magazine of international literature and culture, currently celebrating 99 years of continuous publication. If you'd like to purchase a copy of the May 2025 issue or subscribe, please visit worldlit.org. Right now, we have a 20% discount through mid-August. I'll put the coupon code in the chat, and you can also find it in the press release for today's event on our homepage. I'm delighted to be joined by my co-host, Dr. Amit Baisya, my colleague in the Department of English here at the university, who guest edited the Delhi cover feature, and Namrata, Director of Operations at Ananke, a global digital platform focused on women's empowerment. Namrata is a writer, editor, columnist, podcaster, and literary entrepreneur, and will offer a brief introduction to the session and also introduce our participating writers and artists. Good morning, Namrata.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Good evening from Mumbai and good morning to everyone joining us from around the world. On behalf of Ananke, it's my pleasure to welcome you to this special Zoom conversation featuring WLT's latest city issue, Delhi in the Anthropocene, guest edited by Dr. Amit Baisya. I've stepped in today on behalf of our founder and executive editor, Sabeen Muzaffar, who was originally scheduled to host, but unfortunately could not join us due to a medical emergency. She sends her warm wishes and sincere regrets. It's a pleasure to be a part of this conversation and to briefly introduce Ananke, a platform that's been at the forefront of digital inclusivity since 2014. Ananke is a South Asian community-led new media publishing and development platform that creates inclusive conversations in the digital space with a strong gender lens. From its beginnings as a digital magazine documenting women's achievements, Ananke has evolved into a global voice that champions diversity, freedom of expression, and equitable representation in media. Through powerful storytelling, digital editions, and in-depth journalism, Ananke highlights issues that matter from gender equality and sustainability to care work and climate change. Its flagship Empower program has mentored more than 75 girls from across the globe, creating a ripple effect of change. Whether through workshops, summits, or capacity building initiatives, Ananke continues to amplify unheard voices and create her stories, narratives of visionary women shaping our world. Today's conversation explores the themes of Delhi in the Anthropocene, a powerful issue that brings together fiction, poetry, photography, and more to reflect on what it means to live, breathe, and cohabit, both human and non-human, in one of the world's most complex and dynamic cities, New Delhi. While the city often headlines discussions on climate change, air quality, and environmental stress, Delhi in the Anthropocene also invites us to reflect on the interspecies coexistence, resilience, and the imagination of alternative futures. We are honored to be joined today by contributors. Neetu Das. Neetu Das is a bird photographer and poet. She has published 3 collections of poetry, Boki, Cyborg Proverbs, and Crowbite. Das teaches at Indraprasth College for Women, University of Delhi. We are also joined by Sumana Roy. She's the author of 2 works of nonfiction, How I Became a Tree and Provincials, Plant Thinkers of 20th Century Bengal, a work of literary criticism, Missing, a novel, My Mother's Lover, and Other Stories, and 2 collections of poems out of Syllabus and BIP, Very Important Plant. She teaches at Ashoka University, Sonipat. Vandana Singh. Vandana Singh is a professor of physics at a public university near Boston. She's also a transdisciplinary scholar of climate change and a writer of speculative fiction. She was born and raised in India, where she continues to have multiple engagements both personal and professional, and divides the time between New Delhi and the Boston area. We are also joined in by Vishwajyoti Ghosh. Vishwajyoti is a graphic novelist, educator, and a podcaster. He's the author of the graphic novel Delhi Calm, published by HarperCollins India, and curator of the graphic anthology This Side, That Side, Restoring Partition, published by Yoda Press. His podcast in Hindi, Kissa Stories, is popular on all audio streaming platforms. Ghosh is based in Delhi. I'm truly thrilled to introduce someone who's played a pivotal role in crafting this issue, Dr. Amit R. Beshia. Let me begin by introducing Amit. Amit is an associate professor of English at the University of Oklahoma. He teaches courses on post-colonial theory and the environmental humanities. He is the author of, among others, Attunement to Others, Multispecies Cohabitation in the Anthropocene, published by Cambridge UP forthcoming. Mesha also translates from Assamese to English. He is the guest editor of Delhi in the Anthropocene. His thoughtful curation and deep engagement with the themes have brought this edition to life. Over to you, Amit.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction, Namrata. I'd begin by extending my warmest wishes to Sabine Muzaffar, who could not be with us today. And of course, thanks to Daniel Simon for inviting me to curate the issue, and also to all the contributors, both of all of you who could be here and those who are not here today, Siddhartha Deb, Manjula Padmanabhan, and Pratik Vats. I think it's your participation that really made this a wonderful issue. And I'd just like to, in my brief comments, before I turn it over to the contributors, is how this issue came about. This was last summer when Daniel and I met, and we're discussing ideas about a possible issue for world literature today, which I would guess it did. And at that point of time, I was also completing my book manuscript, Attunement to Others, which is now forthcoming. And the second chapter of my book is on multispecies cohabitation in the Anthropocene. And there I look specifically at recent novels, and also kind of touch on multi-species cinema, and also Ravi Agarwal's work on vultures, which of course has been very, and thanks to Ravi, it's going to be the cover of my book as well, whenever it comes out, right? So I was actually thinking about these issues about multi-species cohabitation with a special focus on Arundhati Roy's Ministry of Utmost Happiness and Nilanjana Roy's Wilding's Duology. Uh, uh, Namrata, I think you might have missed introducing Ravi. Sorry about that. Could I just interrupt briefly, let you introduce Ravi, and then I'll go on.
Yes,
I'll just hold my
I'm
thought
really
for a
sorry
moment.
about
Yeah,
that
sorry.
oversight. Yeah. Ravi Agarwal has an interdisciplinary practice as an artist, photographer, environmental campaigner, writer, and a curator. Welcome, Ravi, and I'm really sorry about that oversight.
Sorry, it was a good way of transitioning because I was actually talking about Ravi's image as well, which are, of course, images in the special issue as well. Around about the same time as I was completing this, I was also writing a review of Siddhartha Deb's new novel, Light at the End of the World, and one of the things that struck me, and in fact, I was one of the first reviewers of that novel as well, and one of the things that struck me about the novel was that the first part was so much about air in Delhi. And it was so much about air, of course, the discourse surrounding air. Also, what was in the news at that time was the question of extreme heat because of climate change. So, those questions were obviously coming in at that point as well. So, what I thought as an idea for the issue would be to broaden this from simply multi-species cohabitation while keeping the focus on that intact, but also broaden it to questions of elementals, or what often called elemental eco-criticism, which is the idea of thinking, for instance, about air, water, wind, and dust, heat, and questions like that. So that was the kind of broad idea I had, which is why instead of multi-species Delhi, which is what I began talking with Daniel about, I ended up with the idea of Delhi in the Anthropocene. And of course, when I use the word Anthropocene, I know that this is a word, for instance, which a lot of us do not quite agree upon. But then I find the concept useful for a couple of reasons. I mean, I was also in my book drawing upon Vandana Singh's, who's here with us, her fantastic pedagogic and theoretical work, Teaching Climate Change, where she defines the question of, let's say, what's going on in the world through the lens of polycrisis. So the idea of Anthropocene as polycrisis was becoming very central for my work overall. But one of the other things that I noticed, of course, was that a lot of the works were not simply about diagnosing the issue, diagnosing the crisis or the multiple sides of the crisis, but to think specifically about how humans and non-humans would cohabit and survive in the shadow of the Anthropocene. And in fact, that became a far more central idea. And then as I thought about who the contributors would be, I was lucky, of course, to know many of them personally. Shumona and I, for instance, have known each other for quite a while now, and her work on plants has been very kind of foundational for my own thinking as well. So obviously, I knew that I would like, and since Shumona works in Ashoka, which is very close to the Delhi region, I knew that I would have to have her in the issue, and so also Siddhartha. And yes, thank you, Daniel. In fact, the issue on polycrisis is something I do cite, for instance, in my work as well. And then as I thought more and more about who would come in, Nitu's work, of course, I had been familiar with partially from my work in Northeast Indian literature, and of course, there's a multi-species aspect to Nitu's work, which has always fascinated me. Vishwajyoti also I knew from working with him earlier on his fantastic graphic novel Delhi Calm. And there's a environmental aspect in his work which I've always been fascinated by. And I was also thinking about branching out to questions of cinema. And of course, Shonak Sen's movie, All That Breathes, is obviously creating a lot of waves with its Oscar nomination. But one of the movies which I thought was relatively underwritten about was Pratik Vats's Ibaleu, which is about monkey catchers in Delhi, which is why I thought it would be good to have a feature come interview with Pratik as well. Vandana Singh, of course, I've collaborated with quite a bit. I've interviewed Vandana Singh for a while for her climate fiction, and again, a central presence in my book. Not only do I read Teaching Climate Change in conversation with Amitabh Ghosh's The Great Derangement, but I also read Vandana's Global Cli-Fi, and I'm trying to theorize Cli-Fi from the from South Asia, taking, for instance, Vandana's work as a kind of central framework as well. So, and then Manjula Padmanabhan was someone that Vandana introduced me to, again, a writer whose work I've enjoyed tremendously, read as an undergrad, as a grad student as well, and it was good to know her as we were working in. And then finally, Ravi Agarwal's photographs, which of course, and In the Shadow of the Vulture, which is of course one of the texts that I've used while thinking about vulture extinction, also in Arundhati Roy's Ministry of Utmost Happiness. And again, Ravi is someone I've been collaborating with in a project with Jill Dudur in Concordia University. That's how I got to know Ravi. And he sent some of his images, and we selected a few of them, which I thought would work very wonderfully with the volume. So it's a volume which tried to think a little bit about questions of multi-species cohabitation, the atmosphere, water, and even the question of living under duress, both under the question of the Anthropocene and the current neoliberal order in the Delhi context, which is what I tried to explore in my introduction. I won't take a lot of time on this, but I just wanted to say that one of the limitations I perceive, of course, in this project is that it was a conscious decision on my part to focus only on Anglophone works. I'm not very familiar with Hindi, Urdu, Punjabi, and other languages, for instance, spoken in Delhi. I'm more of an Assamese literature scholar. So obviously, that's a limitation in terms of thinking about other languages and translations from other languages in this particular volume. But I just hope that what I've tried to open up with this conversation and by bringing these wonderful people together, whom you'll hear from more very soon, that it kind of provokes people to think a little bit more about Delhi in the Anthropocene, ecological aspects of, let's say, literature, cinema, as well as photography, and also experimental art in the Delhi context. So I won't take too much time on this, and I'll probably address some of these questions during the Q&A, but I'd like to pass it on to Namrata so that we can allow our contributors to speak and about their wonderful contributions as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. So we'll again start with Neetu Das. Neetu, would you like to please talk about your contribution to this magazine?
Yeah, thank you, Namrata. Thank you, Namrata, Amit, Daniel, for organizing today's. Is there some way that I can see myself? I can't see.
Are you able to see now?
Okay, yeah, I can see myself. Otherwise, I don't know whether I'm visible or audible. Okay, so thank you for organizing this launch and conversation between the contributors of this really wonderful magazine. I have a copy of this with me right now. I really enjoyed going through it, reading it from cover to cover. And thank you so much for making me a part of this Delhi in the Anthropocene special issue. It's also good to see some old friends here. Even though we are in Delhi, we hardly see each other, so that's wonderful. And also, I feel a little queasy about being the first speaker at an event. One has no idea in which direction the conversation will move. So there is this inordinate pressure of getting the tone right. And in his mail, Amit had said that contributors could talk about the contributions, whatever they had submitted, and try to connect their contributions to their larger body of work. So I'll try and do that, but very briefly. And I have two poems in the print issue. Dresses Mikak, Delhi Reach, and Notes on the Bombeck Seba at MKT. And there are 3 more poems in the online issue, which makes it a total of 5. And these 2 poems in the print issue, they deal with questions that I've been working on for a while now, especially regarding multispecies cohabitation and observational ethics and positionality vis-a-vis the human and the non-human. This actually is, it connects with my other work, which is on birding and bird photography. And it's something that I've been thinking about for many years now. And so mainly about how do I position myself when I'm in the field. So these 2 poems, the Delhi Reach, or more precisely, the Kamala Nehru Ridge, within which most of North Campus is based, is my workplace, my commute, and for 13 years was also my home, because I used to stay on campus as a residential faculty member at IB College for Women in Civil Lines. And in Pratik Vats's interview with Amit, he says that these animals look cute, but are untrained and unpredictable and violent. I think he actually said dangerously violent. So I, during my commute every day, twice actually every day, I see them. I see the rhesus macaques on the way. Interacting with people, with the banana sellers, and it is this constant witnessing of of the presence is something that it led to my own led me to think about my own location as something of a human interloper in spaces that are not really mine. And in a larger context, because Amit and I are from the same space, the space that is known as the northeast of India, because I come from that particular space, this idea of the interloper, the outsider, these are ideas that have that stay with me, are constant reminders of who I am in Delhi, where I work and live. And it also makes me wonder about how best to negotiate elements usually perceived of as discordant or disruptive presences, and which led to my writing of the poem on the rhesus macaques. And I took a long time actually to write this poem because I was so ambivalent about the voice I'd use. This is why the my/I appears very late in the poem, almost towards the end. And I look at a similar problems in one of the online poems, Sahibi, but the voice that I use there is different, more ambiguous, more melancholic even, but also more riverine than terrestrial, fish-like, if you will. And it also connects nostalgically to my past by the Brahmaputra in Guwahati and the broader erosion of river-based cultures and identities. The second poem, Notes on the Bombyx Saber at MKT, is also, topographically speaking, MKT is Majnu Ka Tila, so it's right next door to the ridge and civil lines that I mentioned in the previous poem. It's a companion piece to an earlier poem of mine, Notes on the Rhododendron at Laikonso, which is in Meghalaya. But of course, this particular poem is a very Delhi poem with its traffic stops, with its references to traffic stops and NH1 and wedding horses. And it's a numbered poem, like my Rhododendron one, mimicking field notes, the kind that I use when I'm birding, when I'm out photographing birds. And I use this method, this numbering, in a way to foreground, but also critique observational practices of factuality and quantifiability, and also perhaps to see these issues as quote unquote tainted by poetry. I mean, these are terms, these are binaries that I don't really believe in, but it's good to kind of see whether they can work, kind of clash against each other on the page. I enjoyed reading all the other pieces in the volume, especially Angels of Chhatarpur by Siddharth Dev and the graphic narrative by Vishrajyoti. I felt the contributors were able to grasp the visible and the invisible lines of multispecies cohabitation, and also other questions of class and spatial negotiation within Delhi. And you can actually see it as drawn out as a road cutting through the page in Vishwa's story. I love this idea of a line or lines both connecting and dismantling unresolved tensions and claims to space. I think I'll end now, and I'm looking forward to listening to what everyone else has to say about their contributions. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Neetu. Before we move to the next contributor, I would request all the attendees, if you have any questions you would like to ask any of the speakers or the hosts, please drop them in the comments box. We will be taking them up towards the end of the session. Thank you. Next, I would like to invite Ravi. Ravi, please, could you share your thoughts on your piece in this issue?
So thank you, Amit. Thank you, Daniel, for inviting me to contribute those two photographs. I'm going to speak particularly about one of them. They both deal with Delhi. The one I'm speaking about is you mentioned about the shadow of the vulture. So both these photographs are looking at different aspects of Delhi, not because I'm trying to do that, but because it's a constant engagement of different sorts in the city I live in, and at different points in time. And I, like Neetu I was a bird watcher, a very ardent bird watcher with a log journal and thrice a week outings. And throughout the 80s, I was photographing vultures in the Delhi Ridge Forest. And incidentally, I was then also involved in this campaign to save the Delhi Ridge Forest. As you know, it's now a reserve forest. It's no longer something which the city can develop. So the 8,000 hectares. It came from these engagements as a bird watcher from in the forest and photographing them. I was a photographer forever, as something which accompanied me. And these vultures always fascinated me because they nested on the top of the acacia trees, and then soared really high. So any summer evening, because of the thermals, you could see them really, really high, soaring in the city. And as we know now that, so I was invited to do a public art project by Khoj, which is an off space in Delhi, in a called 48C, to do an intervention as an artist. And so these things run parallel what I do, environmental work and photography and other forms. And I visited the Natural History Museum, which unfortunately is now burnt down for one, So, and they had this diorama of two vultures which are feeding off a carcass. And at that time, I had already been engaged with the campaign about vultures, because the vultures died from a population. South Asian vultures, 3 species, perished almost to by 99.5% of their population of 10 million. Because what was finally discovered by the Royal Anthropological Society in London was that because of a pill called diclofenac, which is a painkiller, which we're all familiar with, and that pill really slowly destroys the kidney of the vulture because of the residue in the dead livestock. Because people give it to the livestock to extract more milk than able to give to reduce the pain. So this whole cycle of this kind of extinction of a bird, which was, and it struck me, this bird, which I photographed for a long time, and it's been mentioned in the Ramayana, it's been mentioned in the Cleopatra's Crown. It's an ancient bird, suddenly finds no place. In 15 years, almost disappears from the skies and across the subcontinent. And I decided to intervene in the Natural History Museum with trying to find a pair of living vultures. And through my bird network, I found a living pair in a village near Kota in Rajasthan. And I went there and I photographed them, and I wanted to place them next to these dead dioramic vultures, because Natural History Museum is a strange place, because they want to make this taxidermist model look like they are not dead, but actually they're dead, and they're full of chemicals as well. So it's a very strange kind of play between life and death, which presents itself in Natural History Museums. So I present, and then outside in the main artery, road artery, which leads from central Delhi to East Delhi, which is near Mandi House, in what we call Mandi House. I set up three large canopies and projected the video I had done. And this is a really heavy artery, and every evening there are millions of cars. I mean, almost going through that artery, traversing that route. And people then stopped because I had these huge 30-meter images on the roundabout. 38-meter images and this sort of spectacular 3 screens and things happening inside the museum. People will slow down and look at these images. And one evening I was standing there, and a senior policeman came up to me, an officer, and I was almost expected to be scolded, but the conversation just was completely different. And he said, "Is this your work?" I said, "Yes." And he said, I used to see vultures in my village. I can't see them anymore. And to me, really, it crossed many boundaries that he'd sort of not seen the uniform, the mess of the traffic, but actually was noticing what was happening on the roundabout. So I think, and I wrote an essay which Amit mention because this accompanies most of my work in terms of keeping a diary or writing something. And to me, this was really a moment of sort of reflection of what art can do, what public art can do to change how people think about it. And of course, I call it extinction with a question mark, because these are sort of, the question was, what does these extinctions mean? What happens when you take a part of an ecosystem away? And the only way in natural science we deal with it is to think of the species gone, but you have a whole cultural relationship and a whole codependent relationship with animal like the vulture. And the vulture is a scavenger, and it's looked upon as a very dirty animal, but actually it's a very, very clean animal because it keeps itself meticulously clean. So it's a clean scavenger. So it's got all these sort of things which we project onto the vulture, like we project on many animals, which are part of our history of sort of how we think of these animals, which is not true when you bring them into the cultural space. Have multiple relationships which open up. And when I went to photograph the vultures in near Kota, I went to some villages, and there was one species of the scavenger vulture which is still found in the villages that had not disappeared completely. And in the mountains was a long-billed vulture, which is not dependent on human interaction so much. And people would talk about them, about why they protected them, why they didn't. So these things which get missed out when we think of the separation, and this separation is something I reflect and think about. In fact, my next show is about natural history museums, which is I've been photographing for the last 15 years. So every visit I travel anywhere, any city, I take half a day out to just visit a natural history museum as a visitor. And it's fascinating how these animals are thought about, classified, and portrayed in our imagination. And but they are part of an ecosystem of life, and which completely shifts. So now in Delhi, you don't see any vultures. The best you can do is see kites. And there was one which was hanging around a few years back. I don't see that anymore either. So to me, it's a question of how do we deal with. There's this whole pain of extinction, with a scholar in Australia has written about the pain of extinction, and I think this is something we don't really think about. That, and if I think about this, that what is the sentence of an animal like the vulture, or any animal, and what does pain mean in terms of their context? Because we don't think outside the human in terms of all these things. And briefly about the second image, which might be just very briefly, is photographed in something called it's called Capital in Transition, because I've been photographing for a long time the history of capital in Delhi. And so this is the Birla Mills, which was then closed down by the Supreme Court and then transferred, because they had first taken all the workers out of the city. These were the original mills of the Birlas, and the many other mills as well. And then it was ultimately sold as real estate to malls. But this particular three images, I used one of them. One of them is where G.D. Birla used to sit in that room. And that's where his first place of commerce was. And when I took special permission to photograph that mill, and they said, please don't advertise the fact that G.D. Birla sat there. We're really worried because that they will not let us demolish this mill, because this mill was part of a company which the stock of which had really gone up ever since the mill was up for sale, because it's invaluable land. It's acres and acres of land in the center of the city. So that was the condition of photographing. And of course, 10 years later, I did publish those photographs. But it was ironic that the history of capital, where the mill started, then got closed and gone to another sort of use, high-end use, but the workers had completely disappeared. So these questions of justice and more than human are something which have been preoccupying me for a lot of my work. So thanks.
Thank you so much, Ravi. That was brilliant and very insightful. Moving on to our next speaker, Sumana, can you please share some thoughts about your piece?
I'm thinking about my first days in Sonipat. So as the bus moved towards the road which takes us past the TDI mall in Haryana, Sonipat, something Vishwajyoti will recognize. In the first few days after arriving there to teach the university where I teach, I checked to see whether what I saw outside the window, that shuttle, the bus, was really what it was. Dividing the road, the entire stretch, I must emphasize, are the same trees, the white plumeria that we also call Ranyapani. Disoriented by the desert-like heat, my mind, it was very hot at that time, 2019. My mind had imagined white flowers almost as snow on trees. This was momentary and was followed by the truly disorienting realization, the fact that all the trees in this large area were of the same species. And the immediate thought that followed was, quite obviously, this hadn't. Okay, I'm speaking from my phone. I'm sorry, Vandana. I'll try and come closer to the phone. Looking at this, line of trees of the same species, the white plumeria, it came to me that this hadn't happened naturally, of course. This was part of a landscaping plan. And what I saw, therefore, were not the trees as much as the handiwork of man. It wasn't the gardeners I thought of, but the people who had decided on this. The violence of their imagination that saw beauty in sameness, in oneness, in only one time. Michael Pollan reminds us, just give me a moment, I'll just get the phone close. I was just talking about my first few days in Sonipat when I arrived to teach at the university where I teach, and my disorientation at looking out of the university bus that from where I lived to the university campus, and realizing that this entire stretch of this route, the road divider had just one species, which was the white plumeria. And as most of you know, Michael Pollan reminds us in his book, continuously in his work actually, about the dangers of monoculture. So what I saw on that road in Sonipat, and what is to be seen almost everywhere now, particularly on highways, where the road divider is planted with only one kind of plant or tree for kilometers, is the scariness of this monoculture in operation. I'd use the word boredom instead of a synonym for fear, but had it just been that, the sense of sameness created by the school uniform, for instance. It was this monoculture that led me to write PWD Plant when Amit and Daniel asked me to contribute to this issue. On road dividers in the Delhi NCR region, you find really large flower pots stamped with the sign PWD, Public Works Department, almost as if it were a scientific name for the species that has been planted in the flower pot. Michael Pollan writes, and I'll just quote from him, "No monoculture could succeed under such circumstances. So the Incas developed a method of farming that is monoculture's exact opposite. Instead of betting the farm on a single cultivar, the Andean farmer, then as now, made a great many bets, at least one for every ecological niche. Instead of attempting, as most farmers do, to change the environment to suit a single optimal spot, the Incas developed a different spot for every environment. I was reminded of this, and I was made to see there almost instructively that the human eye's need for order and control was evident in that road divider and the vegetation that had been planted on it. Yet we know from our own experience that it is the forest with its last resistance to human ordering that we prefer over the park. The park, with its geometrically aligned shrubs and manicured trees, might offer us a place of rest, but it rarely brings calm. We long for places beyond human ordering, outside the folds of human power. Only there is diversity of the truest kind beyond our interference. The forest, more specifically the jungle, sleep, death, only in these places can we truly rest, because they continue to remain outside human control. In the university campus where I teach, for instance, the same desire for control, for ordering exists. So trees are lined along the pathways with names of founding faculty and founders, in a plug just beneath these trees, with no history of people who have watered the plants or the gardeners, just people who have planted them. It's just about optics. So passing by the monoculture of white plumeria might have filled me with fear because of the display, however unintentional, of human power, a warning against interbreeding, a phenomenon that is at the heart of biological and artistic life. I think I was filled with fear because it reminded me of a slogan that I did not want to recollect for fear of it coming true. One people, one empire, one leader, and similarly, one plant in one particular region promoted by a government bureaucracy. So the desire for oneness, for the proliferation of only one kind at the expense of all others, as we see in India, in America, in other parts of the world, is a maniacal one. It is the opposite of unity in diversity, which in spite of its inelegant phrasing, has managed to, or had managed, I would say, to sneak into our consciousness in the way we understood both the social and natural life order. I had always found the uniform, both noun and adjective, uninteresting in art and in life. Now it scares me, as I imagine it scares many of us here. Who knows when it might be my turn to be rejected, or yours, or to be weeded out for this monoculture that my beautiful country might become. Particularly when Amit and Daniel asked me to contribute to this issue, these were thoughts that ran through my head. Also because I was thinking of the trees of Delhi in the context of the NCR, the National Citizens Register, and how so many of these trees in Delhi would not find their way into a citizens register if one were to exist for plants, because they would be considered foreign. Thank you.
Wow, that was definitely thought-provoking. Thank you so much, Sovana. Vandana, could you please share thoughts on your pieces in this issue?
Yes, thank you. And thank you to Daniel and Amit for organizing this. And I'm just so grateful to be in such fine company in this event, and of course in the magazine as well. I loved everybody's contributions. So we are at an extraordinary moment in human history and in planetary history, where our the very existence of humankind and multiple species is in a sense held to ransom by by a very, very small group of extremely rich and extremely powerful people, and the systems they've created to make sure that they maintain their stranglehold on power. And so I've been for a long time, trying to study and understand climate change. My background's in theoretical physics, not in climate science. But through that journey, and because I was raised by the trees and the wildlife of Delhi, and always had this sense of looking at the world through multiple lenses and multiple, taking on different identities and so on. And I'll get to that in a moment. Because of that, I knew that you can't just look at what's happening to the world through a purely scientific lens, because that's often counterproductive. And in fact, we have to look at it as whole beings, as earthlings, as part and parcel, as bodies. And so some of the way I was thinking about this, the way the story came to me was actually as an image. And I imagined this hot, dusty road, where the trees had been cut down. And every time I hear about any of those ancient trees of Delhi being cut down, it really literally cuts my heart open, because I'm born from those trees. I breathe the oxygen of those trees. So I imagined this long, dusty road where there was just one great peepal tree left. And I imagined a very, very hot day, because we know that extreme weather is a consequence of climate chaos. And I saw in my mind's eye a rickshawala pulling his, driving his rickshaw down the road, and the creak of the wheel. I could hear the creak of the wheel. And then there was a Mercedes stopped, with a man, a very well-dressed man, standing by it. And that was it. And I've been, they say, as people have said about other cities, you can take a girl out of Delhi, but you can't take Delhi out of the girl. And that's the case for me. So I've been writing about Delhi for a long time, in fiction, and mostly fiction, actually. And so to me, this became a story about Delhi and what Delhi has come to represent. Because I'm one of the few people here, I know Ravi's got to be one of them, and I think our paths must have crossed at some point, because I'm one of the few people here who remembers Delhi before it was polluted, before we used a lot of plastic, when the skies were blue, the air was clean, and it was just full of wildlife. And I used to observe birds and keep a notebook since probably the age of 11 or so. And I remember making a bird bath for the wild birds and so on. And then later I joined a group called Kalpavriksha, and I still remember going to the municipal offices in Delhi and trying to talk to the big shots about air pollution, even though the kind of pollution we had at that time, which was in the 80s, was far less than, I could not have imagined at that time the extent to which Delhi is polluted now. I also have fond memories of the Natural History Museum. So in any case, and all the way till I'm a proud alumna of Miranda House and then Delhi University for my master's. So throughout that time, I was engaged in looking at the environment. One of the things that I was taught by the street dogs and the mynas and the paradise flycatchers and all the other creatures of Delhi was that animals and other beings have agency. They have points of view. They are not inert machines. And that there is no real good reason for humans to think of themselves as privileged in any meaningful sense, other than the fact that we have power and opposable thumbs. So it's through all this churning in my mind that I've written stories about Delhi. And this particular one, because at that time I was really thinking about how power pervades every aspect of our lives. Power hierarchies, inequalities of different kinds. And of course, the most overlooked and the most taken for granted and the most drastic, perhaps, is that power differential that we have created, we've deluded ourselves into between humans and non-humans. So although my story, interestingly, is one of my few departures from science fiction, from speculative fiction, it's almost purely a realist story in one sense. Trees don't show up except by their absence, and except near the end, where you do get to see this giant people tree. And that's in a way my tribute to the trees, because it's their absence that impoverishes us and all of us. And so at this extraordinary moment, the way I think about, I'm trying to develop this binocular vision about looking at the world through science, through literature, through beyond science and literature, because one of the things I want to just end with is the fact that we were colonized, like most of the world. India and other parts of the world, pretty much almost all the world was colonized by Europe for 300 to 500 years. And so many of the ideas, and consider the language in which we're speaking, and many of the concepts we've inherited from that colonization experience. And the shadow of colonialism is really, really long. And that's why we have this obsession with monoculture, as Vandana Shiva has also noted in her book, Monoculture of the Mind. We have kind of capitulated to that on a mass scale. So there's nothing inherent about the structure, the socioeconomic destructive structure in which we live today. There's nothing default, there's nothing inherent about it. As Ursula Le Guin said, and I'm going to end with her words here, not verbatim though, but from my memory, that she said that, we live in capitalism, its power seems inescapable. So did the divine right of kings. And then she goes on to say that any structure constructed by human beings can be examined and destroyed and reconstructed by human beings. So I'll end on that hopeful note. Thank you.
Thank you, Vandana. That was definitely a lot of food for thought for all of us here. Can I please request Vishwajyoti to, Vishwajyoti, can you please share some thoughts about your pieces in the magazine?
Yeah, hi. I will start with a dilemma that I've always questioned myself, and that has worked with me. When I was in college, we had this huge, long, tall tower. Which is an aberration to the area that I used to grow up, where we went to college, central Delhi, right opposite the Supreme Court. There was a tall tower which overlooked the Supreme Court and everything. And over there, every morning we used to find 4 or 5 vultures. So, and this is early 90s. And I was always very intrigued by the fact that why are the vultures sitting here? There's no carcass here. There's nothing here, but why are they sitting here? But it seemed to be like, they were members of a college or something. And it always made me this question this whole question of these vultures in this city. And I made this theory for myself that vultures must be the true Delhiites, because this concept of a true Delhiite is always a $1 million question. In my childhood, I thought vultures, sparrows, and crows were the only 3 true Delhiites in that sense, or in the bird category or something. Because wherever you go, you are, you question, and you are also questioned that actually where are you from. This question of actually where you from is basically questioning your point of origin. I'm a second generation Delhiite. My parents grew up here, so they are as much Delhiites. But this whole question of what is a Delhiite is always something which is question, and it brings to me the larger question of this whole concept of home and migration. So are we really migrants, or are we really part of the city, is something that I question. Which is why it intrigues me to work with people and stories which are questioning this whole dilemma of mine. And I came across working with the migrant workers, and I say the term migrant workers because they say the term migrant workers because they also know that they are not here for a good time. I mean, if tomorrow another city opens up, they will go elsewhere. If it better opportunities, they will go elsewhere. They have most of the migrant workers who are working in the textile industry in Gurgaon have actually come from Surat. Many of them have worked with the diamond industry. Many of them have worked with the textile industry. But then the garment industry came up in the late 90s, and then they all flocked here. So for me, this was a very interesting moment of how the city changes, how new things come around the city. This whole concept of Gurgaon in the NCR came up again late 90s. It springed up in the late 90s, though the city has been there, the micro city has been there forever. And then with the coming of the metro and coming of the factories and everything around it, brought in a whole new population. And for me, that is very interesting, of this appropriation of local cultures that comes with migration is something that intrigues me, because yes, I am also interested in this antithesis to monoculture. So and it is a part of the migration journey, to create your own culture and articulate your own culture. The Durga Pujas in this city keep going up every year. The Rath Yatras keep going up every year, and these small every apartment complex has its own garba. So what are these? These are basically articulations of local culture, and for me that is very interesting, of creating a sense of identity. I worked on this story around from this premise, but it turned out something else, which is actually a story that stuck with me when I was working and doing a lot of interviews with these workers. And this is a story about this woman who's actually here to looking for a husband, which is actually her prime motivation to be here. And now finally she has found a life of her own. Uh, but what intrigues me is that when you find a life of your own, how you create your own world, and what is just a tip of the iceberg is this finding this own sense of identity. But how do you extend it to your own articulation of your own specific identity and culture is a different ball game altogether. For example, a lot of these migrants now write their own songs in their own languages. They hire a farmhouse, they create music videos, they distribute CDs of their own music, which is about their experience in these areas. And for me, those are bigger stories that I'm yet to actually articulate in pen and paper. So for me, yeah, this is a work in progress, and much like this city, which is a forever work in progress. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vishwajyoti. A lot of this conversation has felt like a walk down the memory lane for me personally. I spent all my school holidays in Delhi with my grandparents, and this is the Delhi I remember because I grew up in the 90s. It was filled with birds, trees, and flowers. And some of the questions which have been raised here resonate very deeply, as I have also been reflecting on them, especially in the light of how Delhi has been appearing in the news in recent years, often in connection with air quality and other environmental concerns. So now, as we move to some questions and comments which have been shared here, the first question is actually for Amit. Amit, would you like to take that question?
Yes, thank you for the question. That's actually an important one, and I'd like to address this both autobiographically as well as my own interests in the question of Delhi and the Anthropocene. Unlike a lot of you, I've actually spent very little time in Delhi. It's only 3 years, 3 very formative years of my life. But I spent a year doing what I would say virtually nothing, although I worked at a call center for a brief bit. I did a few odd jobs here and there, but then I went to JNU for my master's for 2 years, which was kind of formative for me in many different ways. And of course, I've been going back and forth to Delhi pretty much every year. I do transit through Delhi. I spend some time in Delhi before moving on to Guwahati because I still have friends, relatives, and of course, intellectual companions there as well. Um, but one of the things which kind of struck me, and I'm going to start with the personal dimension first, is let's say my first extended visit to Delhi was in 1996 when I uh, went for my undergrad admission, and I didn't stay in Delhi. I went back to Guwahati after that. But my memory of heat, and I don't know how true that is because memory often plays tricks with you. My memory of the heat in Delhi was very different from the memory of heat in Delhi, I mean, from the experience of heat in Delhi right now. It tended to be a drier heat, whereas now when I get there, it's a lot more, if you think about it. It's a lot more humid, it's a lot more sticky. So, obviously, in some ways, the fact that the body experiences the heat differently, right? And that too in a span of about 20 to 25 years is something to be accounted for. So, that's, let's say, the more personal phenomenological experience of how things have happened. And of course, part of what Vishwajit Jyoti was saying in terms of, let's say, the operationalization of the Delhi metro, the proliferation of malls, the way in which the city structures have changed, and it was very different in 2003 when I left it for the first time. And when I left it, when I left for the US, and then when I would return back, the differences in the spatial architectures were huge. And I think part of it is also I was reading Banu Subramaniam recently, actually in relation to something about trees as well, and she says something that I'm still learning to tell stories in planetary time, but there is a certain shock of Anthropocene time that something and speed and acceleration happens. So, and for me, the personal experience of Delhi was a bit like that. On a different basis, if I were to look at it from a literary scholar standpoint, or and also the standpoint of someone who kind of follows the cinema being produced there and the artworks, what I noticed, of course, and I think Daniel has put this on the chat as well, is that as far as Indian Anglophone literature is concerned, I mean, Bombay tends to hog most of the attention. Delhi, though, and one thing I've been noticing over the last 10 years or so is that there's more of an ecological dimension coming up on works on Delhi. I mean, it's of course there on other cities as well, but there's a kind of critical mass which remains to be theorized. And while people have been thinking a lot about spatial dimensions of the city, Alex Tickle and people like that have talked about the spatial dimensions of the city. One thing which is missing is both the multi-species aspect and also the ecological aspect, I think. And then, while there are occasional essays on it, what I felt was and this is what led to multi-species Delhi in my book, was this contention not only with animals but also with plants. So we've talked a lot about monocultures, the shift, for instance, in plants and questions like that. So that was part of the intention as well, is to bring in the question of Delhi as probably, I mean, the critical mass of works coming around Delhi, dealing with its ecological aspects and its multi-species aspects as well. And that's the focus. And it's, of course, a city I know better than others. For instance, I was telling Namrata that I've actually only been once to Mumbai, so maybe my affective connection to the city is not that great in that particular respect. Same goes for Calcutta as well, even though it's closer to Guwahati. But so Delhi is a city where I feel I have more of a sense of the changes going on, having lived there, but also in some sense having, in a certain way, thought about it both as an insider and outsider as well, but also thinking about it through literature. So that's why the focus on Delhi specifically. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I don't think we have any other questions in the comments. Would you like to ask any questions to the contributors, Amit?
Sure. I mean, part of the question, part of what I thought came together very well, and I think it comes up a little bit in terms of Bandana's responses as well. The connection, because I hadn't really thought about the absence of trees in your story quite as much, right? So one thing which I would like to invite both, you, Nitu, and Sumana maybe to respond first up, and Ravi and Vishwajyoti as well, is to think specifically about the question of plant life, right? It's something which tends to be far less foregrounded than, let's say, human animal relationships, or what one could call, for instance, a relationship with street dogs or cats and so on and so forth. So it seems to me that there is a kind of implicit pattern which is coming up in a lot of the works, which is dealing with the question of plant life per se. Given that I'm thinking specifically about plants at the moment as well, right? Through Sumona's work, plant thinkers in 20th century Bengal is something I just wrote about recently, by the way. So I would just ask you, I would invite all of you to think a little bit or maybe contribute a little bit to this question about multi-species existence in some sense, but specifically focusing plants. Let's begin with that and then hopefully we'll have more questions.
Should I go first?
Go ahead, Sumana.
I'm speaking to you, Amit,
Mhm.
and from Shiliguri. The natural expectation would be that I would be surrounded by a lot of plant life. I'm in the foothills
Mhm.
of Eastern Himalayas and so on. But the hormones, I mean, small town India is being destroyed by the steroids of capitalism. And I cannot recognize, I think of my mother-in-law who died in 2003. And sometimes when I take the highway or even, go to visit my parents, I sometimes become my mother-in-law and imagine what who had spent 73 years of her life in this town, how this town would be unrecognizable to her. This is a town where neighborhoods are named after trees, as is common practice, not just in Bengal, but in large parts of northeastern India, in fact, most of the Indian subcontinent. So when I would visit my parents, one of the places I would need to go to is a place called Pakur Tala. Tala is, under the Pakur tree, Neem Tala, Bot Tala, Am Tala. So this spiritual, I would say, philosophical tradition of sitting under a tree, what it had brought to Nanak or to Siddhartha and so on, all these are being destroyed. For instance, the town where I used to teach in, the neighboring town is called Jalpaiguri. Guri would be, root, trunk, and Jalpai is olives or Indian olives. So many of these settlements here derive their names from plant life. If you were to ask me now, not only are these being destroyed, there is only one quote unquote park in Siliguri. There are 1,600 parks, that is what the internet tells me, in Delhi. So there is no dearth of plant life in Delhi. Your question is, why is the question of plant life ignored? Because we see a lot of trees and plants there. Whether they are the right plants for Delhi, we don't know. Pradeep Kishan tells us in his book, Trees of Delhi, that some of these have destroyed the soil composition of Delhi and so on. Let me just focus for a minute on plant life in Sonipat, which is where I live and teach for half of the year. These trees that we find on the Ashoka University campus, and I think this would be true for most of these new campuses, private university campuses everywhere, they are purchased as very tall trees. So there is no sense of history being developed in relation to not just the soil, but also to communities that had a relationship, an older relationship with these trees. So the agricultural fields have given way to these new campuses and so on. So when I come from a place like Sonipat to Delhi, which I visit very, very rarely, I am surprised in the most beautiful way about, the first trees I meet when I enter Delhi are neem trees. And I remember the last time I went with my friend Ritu Porna Sengupta, a scholar herself and a translator who teaches in Jindal. And we were so happy just to see this shock of neem trees, as it were. So I think What you might be hinting at is there a kind of plant blindness when it comes to us thinking of the Delhi Anthropocene? I don't, there is. Ravi, Vandana, Vishwajyoti have all commented or remarked on, sorry, the absence or the growing absence of vultures. We do not see this necessarily in relation to plant life and are therefore perhaps being deluded to imagine that, these many parks and so on have nurtured plant life in a way that that other places, such as the one where I'm speaking from you, from here, have not necessarily been able to. Have taken up a lot of time. Vandana and me too now. Sorry, and my camera suddenly started working. I see.
Thank you, Sumana, and thank you, Amit, for that question. So yeah, I mean, there's so much to think about here. I definitely think there is a plant blindness. I think we have inherited that way of thinking from colonialism. Where plants are even lower in the pyramid of like power, and they're invisible essentially. And I'm thinking about this conversation is making me think about being like 9 or 10 years old, and my family is from Bihar, talking about where one is actually from, or whatever that means, right? I'm also from Delhi, but in a different sense, I'm from Bihar. And we spent 2 years, used to go there every summer to Patna. And I remember 2 years living with grandparents when my father was posted there. And I used to spend most of my time, as much time as I could spare, on trees. And in fact, I remember thinking at some point later in my life that humanity took the wrong turn. I mean, like our ancestors, our primate ancestors should have stayed on trees. Because I got so much, I don't know, I can't even articulate what I got out of just lying on the branches of a tree, a guava tree in particular, I'm thinking of, and watching the parakeets eat guavas, just a few feet away from me and so on. And particularly with Delhi trees, I want to honor what I saw in the comments from Ishmeet, because the 1984 violence actually started in front of my house. We lived in East Kidwai Nagar, right across from Ames at that time. And so I saw that horror unfold. And in fact, my neighborhood, we young people took the responsibility of making sure nobody within my neighborhood was hurt, because we did, we mostly, people from early 20s down to 5-year-olds formed a group and just, did a kind of protection force of all the afflicted people or potentially affected people in that colony. So the trees were such a presence in East Kidwai Nagar. Now, if you look at it, talking of another kind of violence, East Kidwai Nagar is completely transformed. It's these tall residential towers and huge commercial blocks. And they are on a scale that is like just bizarre. And then the trees are all gone. It was very, very rich in trees and in all kinds of wildlife, and all of that is gone. So, and that kind of violence continues unabated in Delhi. And now they have these high metal walls that you can't even see the violence that's happening behind the walls, where they're taking these old residential government colonies and are just razing them to the ground. So I think that it's this plant blindness is really, really important to understanding what's happening. But it also goes deeper than that. It goes into this kind of venal, short-sighted, short-termism, where it's all about the money and it's all about power. And instead, why can't we think about trees? Now, here's something very fundamental about trees. They don't discriminate. A tree will give, like there's a mango tree I'm thinking of in my mother's garden in Gurgaon. And that tree is, leans over the road, and its mangoes, it's for everyone. The shade is for everyone. Doesn't distinguish between caste, creed, religion, species, nothing. There's an incredibly deeply important lesson we can learn from trees and from plants and from their amazing ability to make the world. And in fact, we often don't think about this, but these little floating green plants in the ocean, the phytoplankton, they're responsible for more than 50% of our current oxygen production. And that's huge. We are connected through space and time with plants everywhere. Like, I couldn't take a single breath without plants. And yet, why are we taught about them when we are taught about them in this disconnected, remote, fragmented way? So, and I'll end with one more thought, which is that even though I went only, well, twice sort of to the Northeast, I have very, very fond and deep memories of it. Once passing through Guwahati on the way to Shillong in my high school years, where I was impressed with how green everything was. Unlike Delhi, you did not have the sides of the roads covered in dust. Every piece of soil was occupied by greenery. And that was astonishing to me. I still remember that. The other thing, and then more recently in 2019, I went back to the Eastern Himalayas, although this time to outside Kalimpong in North Bengal. And there fell in love with a bamboo grove on the side of the mountain. And I still, it's like these are these short exposures, but they have a disproportionate effect on one's consciousness. So yes, yes to everything Sumana said and what we're all discussing. Thank you.
Could I invite my fellow Guwahatian Neetu to speak to this as well?
Yeah, I'll just speak
the-
briefly because
Yeah.
so much has already been said, and I don't know how we are for time. I maybe I don't know. I don't want to kind of say this as if it's the truth for everyone, but it is true for me that I can't think of plant blindness in my own life. Mainly because of my mother, that she was born in a place like Margarita, and she tried to bring a part of that space to our Guwahati home. And so we had a garden in the sense that, she tried to grow vegetables and flowers, even though she had a very busy life. And one of the first things I remember was when she tried to show me how a balsam seed pod exploded. You would just press it and the seeds would just explode in your hands with your fingers. And I think that's one of the first things I think of when I think of my mother and I think of plant life. And it's about the seed pod exploding. And I also, I also can't think about plant blindness because I think about birding and I have to think about, looking at birds, and I have to think about trees. I have to think about which trees would give life and support or in various ways. When I wrote the Bombay Siba poem, I was thinking about birds, even though I tried to move away from birds in this particular poem, but I was at the back of my mind always, there are birds. So then, this was one point that I wanted to talk about because I find it so difficult to negotiate the idea of people not seeing plants, because plants, they are witnesses to my life, to my very existence, as it were. Everything about me, my memories, my everything about me is connected, is totally intertwined with the idea of plant life. And so when once I had to write this review of a book, M. Krishnan's book, and when he used to write essays on bird life and birds, but he also wrote a lot about plants. And he had this very, I would say interesting, maybe, it's a polite way of saying, referring to what he was saying, but he called the gulmohar tree a strumpet, because it was for him a non-native plant, someone like an outsider, too flashy. I don't have to explain to you, what the word strumpet means in this context. It's a very patriarchal, very demeaning way of looking at a person. It's also a demeaning way of perhaps looking at a tree because it's a non-native tree, and it's something that constantly stays with me, because even though I do read his works as a bird, as one of the pioneering photographers of bird life, and but still, this idea of a gulmohar as a strumpet stays with me, because you can't really think of Delhi without these lanes of gulmohar trees or these lanes of amaltas. Anyway, this is one thing that came to my mind as I was thinking about something that Sumana had said, about which tree would be native and which tree would be an outsider. And there was one, because we're also talking about colonialism. Some years ago, I taught Sexing the Cherry by Janet Winterson, and a lot of what colonialism is about is connected in this absolutely fascinating text to ideas of grafting. And I think grafting is something we need to maybe kind of bring into our understanding of how we can look at the fragmented identities that we inhabit, and also maybe the idea of grafting and creating things anew would be something that I would be interested in seeing in my own response to plants and plant life in my work. Very briefly, that's what I wanted to say.
Namrata, can I quickly respond to
Yes,
Sneha's
yes,
question
please,
as well?
please.
That was a great question about the question of housing and automobility. And one of the reasons why I wanted to bring this question of neoliberal development here as well, the issue is one interesting thing that I noticed, for instance, in my book, and I do mention that as well, and it's in the reading list. The oldest novel, English novel that I included in the reading list is by Ahmed Ali, which is Twilight in Delhi. And one of the things which is there in Twilight in Delhi, it's interesting that the cats there, it's a very cat novel, right? It's a very feline-centric novel, and just like it's a pigeon-centric novel as well. But one of the things which you see, for instance, in that particular novel, written during the time of the First World War, roughly around the time of the First World War, is how the cats would traverse, for instance, on the roofs of those old constructions. Now, fast forward, like let's say 100 years, read Nilanjana Roy's Wilding's trilogy and duology. And one of the things that it's told, it's a history of Delhi told literally from the cat standpoint, right, of the feral cats. And one of the things which is missing there is basically what I call the roof tree assemblage, the fact that trees are cut down, and the fact that, for instance, the older roofs, Mayank Austin Sufi has this images of older houses with tacks, for instance, the sloping roofs, which are being taken over, so to speak, by contemporary kinds of neoliberal developments like those high rises and so on. And there's a beautiful moment in the book which says, the cats, right, the new buildings, they're not friendly to the cats anymore. And in fact, I've read stories about sparrow disappearance as well, which also talks, for instance, about how, for instance, species extinction or species disappearance, for instance, of very ordinary birds may also have something to do with constructions as well. So yes, in a certain way, I think part of this question about multi-species cohabitation, and it's just as plants in some ways, the cutting down of trees and so on, but it's also the question of new constructions and the way in which they kind of colonize and also homogenize space in a certain sense. And I think that's the difference of Vishwajuti, for instance, when he talks about the earlier memory of the city in Delhi Kam, which is uh, what I was fascinated by was so much about the movements through the city and so on. So maybe if you could probably pitch in a little bit to think, for instance, about these notions of development, let's say constructions and so on, as a kind of response to this question as well.
No, I'm not that much of a plant literate person, except the fact that I am constantly now living into this fear when half an hour of rain and trees are uprooted in the city at any given time. The first thing I do is check my car insurance, that is my car covered with a tree falling over it, because that's pretty much frequently happening now across the city because of the kind of roads and the construction that is happening. I think the biggest public art installation right now going on in the city for quite some time is actually the blue shutter. And you can see the blue shutter everywhere, it just blocks the view and something new comes up in a couple of years. And, it's either a blue shutter or a green shutter. But those tin shutters are the biggest installations that are happening in the city. Yes, I mean, I am part of the city where, I grew up in a government colony, and most of the government colonies now have been raised to dust. And just like East Kidwai Nagar, new towers will come up there. Um, what I miss actually with these places going away, they have their own cultures, and that's something that I really miss more than the plants, because I'm not that much of a plant person. So yeah, so I like East Kidwai Nagar had a fantastic Ram Leela. We used to flock there to see that Ram Leela, and it was next to the market, and that had its own culture. So those things is something that the city keeps changing, and intrigues me, and I hope you know. Certain cultures are restored, the Holi of Kakanagar or the Ram Leela. These are the things that really intrigue me and interest me. So, yeah. So, I am more interested actually in this whole concept of coming around, negotiating with changes in cultures that happen, all the time. So, yeah.
And Ravi, if I may ask you about the second photograph, your Capitals in Transition series, right? And one of the things that strikes me, of course, is in the ruins of old buildings, how you have certain forms of plant life, almost tendrils creeping out. I mean, that really struck me in terms of the image. In fact, I was kind of contemplating asking you for that image for the book later on, but then I think the vulture is kind of the picture with the vulture was so fascinating in itself, the person sleeping in front of the vulture. But I was wondering, in terms of your photography itself, a lot of it has dealt a lot with places like Balswa, the resettlement colony. You've also dealt with the ruins of capital, so to speak, in some sense, right? Old buildings which are empty and so on. And I think those you've had this wonderful phrase which I've used in my work, which is the non-places of the Anthropocene in one of your work. So maybe one way we could kind of like slowly wrap it up as we are kind of coming to the time is to invite you to talk a little bit about your work, about the non-places of the Anthropocene and how you see, for instance, that in Delhi. You're muted. You're muted.
Environmental work and what, so my art sort of follows my concerns, and on my personal relationships. I mean, I have had a long relationship with plants, and there's certain kind of plants which we protect more than the others. The people tree in my late parents' backyard, or the mango tree where I used to play with squirrels since I was 4 years old, scampering up and down the backyard mango tree, or the tree outside my grandfather's house in Rajasthan, which is a huge banyan tree. And the whole campaign for the rich forest with Vandana, now that he's saying Kalpariksh, it's sort of long associated with Kalpariksh, which we started campaigning and sort of trying to protect, was completely do with. So I don't see plants as, there are certain plants we certainly we have strong religious cultural relationships to, which we protect more, but there are also, I can't think of plants separate from animal life in a city, because I live in a home in South Delhi where it's so full of trees and plants, the home itself, because of that's the way I like it, that my neighbors say you live in a jungle. And how do you live in a jungle? Because my neighbors don't like the trees, because in summer they shed leaves and it falls in their garden. It's saying your trees are shedding leaves. But during COVID, it was full of life, full of squirrels, full of animals, full of. So it's completely, especially in cities, in urban scapes, it's completely interrelated. I think the kind of wildlife we see in cities is completely interrelated to, for me, with trees and with plant life. And as Vandana said, that there is this power equation of visibility. So plants which are not visible are sort of destructible, and we have this whole nomenclature. What is a weed? What is a good plant? What is a foreign plant? So what is invasive plant? These are all sort of very, very complicated categories in which we think of nature. in very human terms, in a sense, when it's got its own life. And as Neetu would know, if you're a bird watcher on the river in Delhi, it's full of water hyacinth. And so water hyacinth has its own invasive things. So it's completely interrelated. And I'm also reminded of the recent campaign to save Kidwai Nagar trees, led by a bunch of friends who really did a dharna there. And earlier, a campaign which I started, which became a citywide campaign to save the trees from the BRTS, and I had a big fight with the road. Everybody knows him, so I'm not going to name him. He's no longer alive, but the road planner, and he said, "You're an environmental terrorist." And I said, "Well, if that's for environmental terrorists, because I used to really stop. I used to go each tree which was being cut. Somebody would call me, and I'll go and stand there and say, 'You can't cut the tree.'" And he really found it saying, "Are you going to follow each tree?" I said, "Yeah, so long as you cut it, I'm going to follow each tree." So, but there is this great relationship of both of observing but also acting to do things in the city. I think this is really like what's happening in the boundaries of Delhi with the Aravali Park, with people like Chetan Agarwal and trying to save that. These are also that while all this is happening, there's also the fact that we can reduce the damage, if we stand up, because one of the slogans we had when we had this tree campaign was, "I am the tree. Why did you talk to me?" Because trees and animals have no agency, and this is a sort of thing, because they have no agency, who's going to speak for them? So we said, "I am the tree. I represent the tree. Talk to me." So I think there are blind spots more in the city, because less so in rural areas, though they're also going there because of I think people are just too busy with getting on with their life. Delhi is a city of migrants. They all come for some other reason and so unless you have some connection with it, like many people have, but I think there's less activism now than ever before. I mean, Facebook activism doesn't cut it. And the last big campaign was for the Kidwai Nagar trees, and it really sort of put everything in this spot. And so I think this completely interconnected the way city is shaped and how citizens want to do this. And the non-places of the Anthropocene you asked me was really an essay on the idea of the landfill, where the landfill becomes the place where capital sort of justifies itself. It's the outlet for capital, because without the landfill there would be no production and processes, because to throw the remnant somewhere. So this complexity which happens in the landfill, which is both with social class and caste, but also with toxicity and the interface of this global place where the landfill becomes a global place of environmental injustice and toxicity, all intermingled and entangled at the same time. So I think we live in these complex sort of places, and it's hard to separate the two, separate things and saying this is only this, everything is happening at the same time. And it's difficult actually to sort of cope with the scale of change. And it's actually quite disheartening it's disheartening to see it happen. You really feel a stab in the heart when you see these things happening. But the question is, how much can you do and what can you do? And in the current political environment, if you speak up too much, they will just sort of make it impossible for you to live your life. So this is not unconnected with the current environment. Still, I'm part of environmental not-for-profit, and it's almost impossible to speak up publicly. So we can't take these things away separately. Suddenly, environmental has become so political that even if you speak up for something, which is, saying you're doing a good thing, it becomes a problem. If you think of the caste relationships of air pollution, who gets more exposures, and the relationship with caste, city segregation, and air pollution, which is very much there, you are in the wrong place. You can speak about air pollution, but you can't speak in caste and air pollution. Somebody will start getting after you in one way or the other. So I'm also worried about this lack of are able to find the new vocabulary, and how much can you cope? I stopped there. Sorry.
Namrata, any other questions or anything else? We're pretty much close, I think, to the 1.5 hour mark. Yeah.
Yes. No, there are no more questions. There are just comments and thoughts that people are sharing. I'm sure we all are reading that as well. Vandana has also shared a lovely thought about how she has benefited a lot from the gift of knowledge from multiple indigenous cultures, especially the concept of collaborative reciprocity, where we are not just bound by responsibilities to those who feed and keep us alive, but also share spirit in that we ourselves are not exclusively and merely human. That's a lovely thought. Thank you so much for this, Vandana. So that brings us to the end of this session. Thank you so much to all of you for joining us today for this thoughtful and deeply resonant conversation. On behalf of Ananke and World Literature Today, I would like to extend my sincere thanks to our guest editors, Dr. Amit Besha, Editor-in-Chief Daniel Simon, and our brilliant contributors, Ravi Agarwal, Neetu Das, Vishwajyoti Ghosh, Sumana Roy, and Vandana Singh for sharing their insights, stories, and creative visions with us today. Special thanks as well to all of you in the audience for being part of this important dialogue. We hope the discussion sparked here will stay with you long after the session ends, and that you will take time to explore Delhi in the Anthropocene in full. A quick reminder before we go, you can purchase the issue or subscribe to World Literature Today at a 20% discount using the code SUMMER20 on their website. This is valid through August 15th, 2025. And of course, stay connected with Ananke for more such conversations and collaborations, amplifying diverse, inclusive voices from across the global South. Until next time, stay curious, stay inspired, and thank you once again for being with us. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Namrata.
Thank you.
Daniel, any last thoughts or
Thank you,
words?
Namrata.
Just before we go. Daniel, any last words or before we sign off?
I look forward to your book. Sorry,
Oh,
Daniel. I thought you were asking all of us. Sorry. Yeah. I'm sorry to interrupt.
I was just thinking about all of the city issues that we've been publishing in the recent years, and how all of them are gripped by climate crisis, a migrant crisis, and how these are intertwined in this, as you say, the ecology and economics of neoliberal world order. So I'm just really thankful to all of you for bringing all these connections together and how reminding us how everything is interconnected.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you
you
so much, everyone.
Please keep us posted about the next set of issues and the ones in the past, the access to them and all of that. Yeah, that would be really helpful.
Of course.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Good seeing you all.
Thank
Bye.
you so
Thank
much.
you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.